Tilt here for another episode of A Feather of Light podcast. And in this podcast, I really just want to give myself space to open up about all the things I've learned over the years as a psychology student, as a student of life, and now more recently, of course, as a coach and counselor. Sometimes these topics aren't necessarily focused on stuff I've learned in the counseling space, but things that I've learned from just having an open mind, an open heart, and really just receiving, some might say, the downloads of this universe and of this beautiful earth that we walk on. So get comfortable, relax, maybe loosen your jaw and relax the muscles of the body that are maybe feeling kind of weary from a long day. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about my experience volunteering at Shambhala Music Festival in the sanctuary. And first and foremost, I'm not going to disclose anything specific or even really any of the details of the guests that I supported, because that is unethical, and that is not in alignment with my value of integrity and respect for others, obviously. But what I can tell you is I've been to the sanctuary a few times as a guest, and thank fucking God harm reduction exists in the way that it does at these music festivals, because some of the most challenging experiences that somebody can encounter in their entire life, I would reckon, would be a challenging psychedelic episode, or sometimes referred to as a psi crisis. So what is a psi crisis? A psi crisis would be defined as when someone takes too much acid, too much mushrooms, too much of any psychedelic for the most part, but sometimes this can be stimulants or other entheogens, as they're called, like MDMA, really anything that puts you over your threshold and you start to get into maybe a disassociated or hyper aroused state, and you're just struggling. You're just struggling. You know, this can even potentially trigger psychotic episodes. And the harm reduction space, called the sanctuary at Shambhala, it's designed to create safety and grounding for those folks, including myself at times, who just need a person to listen to or a safe space to ground and recollect and maybe just do a little light napping, which is tough with all the bass music, but at the same time, it is possible. I can attest, people sleep at the safe space. But getting back to what I was saying, initially, when I attended my second year at Shambhala, I took let's just say a pretty big hit of liquid LSD. And after the initial effects wore off during the daytime, I took, maybe something in the range of 0.5 to 0.8 milligrams of psilocybin. I was just chewing on some mushrooms, and evening was starting to heat up, and I decided to drink a cup of coffee because I figured I could use it. And I didn't really typically drink that much caffeine, but it was something I was given a shot. Maybe it would help me weather the storm, so to speak. And after the first cup of coffee didn't really hit, I decided, hey, let's drink some more coffee. Let's see how that goes. And after big cups of coffee, a little bit of mushrooms and some psilocybin or some LSD that was in my system, still from the earlier in the day, I was ready to hit the stages and have some fun, right? Not necessarily. What ended up happening was I started getting some cramps in my legs, right? Muscle spasms, actually. They were quite severe. And I was just having a hard time walking around because my legs were cramping up. So I decided to go to this sanctuary spot. And first I went to the Anchors tent. So they have a drug testing tent. And I went to the drug testing tent and I was like, hey, you guys got anything to support muscle cramps? And they're like, head on over to the sanctuary, see how they can support you. And I was like, cool, let's do that. And I sat down. They were really nice. They gave me a cup of tea. And I just kind of chilled out for a bit. And then about an hour later, I realized where I was at mentally. And the idea of leaving the sanctuary didn't quite appeal to me. So I sat down, lied down in a bed, and that's where the night got really hairy. And I started to imagine all these things. I got into a full-on psychotic kind of, I guess you'd call it psychotic delusion. I was starting to think that I was going to die, even though there was nothing that really proved that. I just thought I was going to die. And there was no one there that could tell me otherwise, but at the very least they could talk me through it and hang out with me when I needed it. Sometimes I just needed a good cry. That was actually something I was struggling with and have for a long time, is just tapping into deep sadness and really allowing that to be emoted through crying. So when I was in the sanctuary, I came across this possibility that I could be dying. And that's really all it took, was just this idea that, hey, maybe I'm dying. Maybe this entire festival, this grandiose, exciting event is in a way my like send off. Things got to be really, really exciting for a reason, don't they? Anyway, this was what was going through my mind, and I thought I was dying. And it didn't get any easier. I spent the whole night there at the sanctuary, crying sometimes, just feeling into all of these really challenging emotions. And I just had to feel my way through it. I just had to let it kind of run its course. And after I left the sanctuary, I felt amazing. And this is one of the reasons I actually wanted to become a counselor in general, is because I felt so held by this person that it inspired me to do the same for others. And then now fast forward, I think about 6 years later, something like that, I finally garnered the courage, and I would say the skill set as well, to work at Sanctuary and give back in the same way. So I finally did it on a bit of a whim, right? I applied to the Sanctuary maybe 3 weeks before the festival started, and they were really helpful at getting me onboarded. And so if you don't know, when you're at the Sanctuary, you work 12-hour shifts. So they have you on 2 12-hour shifts throughout the duration of the festival. It's kind of nice having it super condensed. It's also really challenging in other ways, for sure. Not very many times would I be working with, say, a counseling client or consecutive people for 12 hours straight. Some folks maybe do, I don't. And so that for me was a bit challenging, but at the same time, I really wanted to test myself. I really wanted to push myself. I really wanted to see what I could handle. And, I got a little bit of what I was like looking for, I suppose, but I was also going to Shambhala sober. So if you guys don't know what Shambhala is, I should probably tell you what Shambhala is. It's this giant ass festival. Now at this point, in this day and age, it's about 20,000 people large. It used to be smaller, but word of mouth. And it's got these massive base stages. They bring in all the headliners. It's really, really fun time. But a lot of people, almost everybody there, uses drugs. And every single different type of substance you can imagine is likely on site. And yeah, as somebody who would go there and take psychedelics, it was often quite overwhelming the first few nights as you're kind of adjusting to the environment that you're in. It's very loud. It's very overstimulating. There's a lot of different stuff going on, and a lot of things you see are just absolutely fucking wild. I mean, just to name a couple things, sometimes people bust out like vacuum cleaners, and people are dressed up like, all sorts of different kind of like wild, crazy animals, fairies. Sometimes they look kind of like demons or monsters, not even on psychedelic. It's just like a performance art thing. People sometimes get on stilts and they're up in the dance floor and they're looking like some kind of astral energy being. And yeah, so there's a lot of glowing, flashing, really, really cool looking folks. And it's a vibe for sure. But when you're tripping on, say, acid or mushrooms or whatever else, this kind of stuff can get pretty overwhelming for the nervous system. So I would say it's really important, if you are attending these festivals, is just to really pace yourself, get your drugs tested, for fuck's sake. It's a free resource there. And ground yourself when you need to, right? Like knowing where the safe space is, knowing where your camp is, knowing at least where a person might be, so you could kind of just like decompress. There are a lot of rest spaces at the festival too, right? Like there's a hammock zone set up near the Grove. There's like chill places intentionally for people who are feeling overwhelmed but not quite comfortable going to the sanctuary and checking themselves in. And I get it. It's a stigma, right? You don't want to be like, oh man, I gotta go to the safe space where they gotta take care of me. And it's kind of like, it's almost like a resignation. It's like a sign of you kind of got beat by the festival. That's how I think some people perceive it. But I just really want to try to dispel some of that stigma that, nah, man, you go to the sanctuary sometimes just to get a cup of soup, cup of tea, just to chill out in a hammock. It's a great time just to, center yourself. And if you do need to talk to somebody, that's what we're here for. We're 100% there on board. And I can't speak for every individual, but many folks are very highly trained. I'm a trained counselor. I'm a professional in the field. I would say that at least 90% of the folks I met were at least some sort of support worker, and they're really eager to support people, and they're there for a reason, right? So I guess that's kind of like what I want to emphasize was going there sober. I wasn't really there for the festival experience. Not really. I mean, not at least for the conventional festival experience that I used to go there for. I mean, the music was great. It's fun. It's an adventure. It's exciting. But I really went there with the intention of, I'm here so I can be of service, so I can support folks when they need it. And this is my priority, is to really do everything I can to show up for these people the best of my ability. And oftentimes that did look like slowing down and not attending all the headliners I wanted to go to, spending lots of time at my camp, just decompressing, chilling, eating properly, sleeping properly, doing all the things that, many folks probably do ideally, but at music festivals, it's just that much harder to do when it's really, really loud at night and there's lots of bass and people aren't used to sleeping when they're just getting pummeled with vibrations of bass. And there's an energy to it, right? Like it's an electricity to the whole place. There's a current. You want to go out and adventure, and there's always something going on. If you really look for it, you're gonna find there's always something going on. And so I guess like the FOMO thing, people can get really tested in terms of the fear of missing out on some sort of experience or some sort of interaction, or maybe looking for that person, right? The love of their life might be around the corner or something. And so as a person who I'm in a relationship right now, right? So I have a partner, and she wasn't able to attend. And I kind of went there with the idea that I was like, you know what? I actually see this as something of a relief. It's actually very comforting to me. I'm not there looking for connection. I'm not there looking for, any of that promiscuity. No drugs, no sex. I'm just here to enjoy the raw experience of the festival, which is often just talking with people, witnessing, lots of people watching, enjoying the music when I can, and just not pushing myself past my thresholds. So I will say, though, that having volunteered at an ayahuasca retreat and been drinking ayahuasca in Peru maybe like 5 months earlier, and then being in this atmosphere, it was quite the 360, the 180. Let's say the 180. Yeah, it's quite the 180. It's just different energy. And for me, I just couldn't expect the same types of interactions. At least, I guess that's where I have to be aware of my own bias. Like, a lot of people are actually really, really chill. And even if they're using lots and lots and lots of substances, it's kind of like that's their happy place. That's where they feel at peace or grounded. And, that really goes in terms of the philosophy of drug use, right? Like, why are people using substances? Like, what is it doing for them? What kind of need are they having met through that? And I work with clients who are either actively in the throes of addiction or more likely post-recovery integration is something I feel like I've talked with a lot of clients about that kind of stuff. So I have a lot more understanding and perspective around those who are using drugs, and kind of like, I'd say the acceptance piece is a huge, huge aspect of Shambhala. And while I'm on this topic of, I would say, values, it was really cool because I met quite a few folks that were doing the Shambassador role. And I've known about this role for a long time, right? Like, the Shambassador is kind of like one of the people that's being, I'm not hired, but they're like a volunteer. They go around, they've been enlisted to really embody the spirit of Shambhala, whatever that means to you. But realistically, I see it as embodying the values of the culture that is the festival, the Shambhala Music Festival. And I had a neighbor of mine, it was his first year doing the Shambassador role, and we talked about this for a while. It's kind of like this hybrid of doing a bit of harm reduction, but at the same time, a lot of your duties are just to bring people into that positive, optimistic, open, adventurous, curious space. Really, just kind of like the awe and the wonder that is this mystical experience of being at a music festival, and trying to allow people to tune into that, maybe helping them get out of their head, help them kind of like reduce the resistance to just enjoy themselves. And it's kind of like they just got to be a little zany, a little outgoing, but like each person is different in the way they embody the Shambhala energy, right? The way each Shambassador is as a person also mimics that. It's like, we're all very unique. The way we want to be received at a festival is very unique. And that's why I find it's really beautiful, the diversity of different individuals that are drawn to that type of role or drawn to the crew at Shambhala. It really, I would say, is very important that there's a diversity of different people with different cultural backgrounds, with different experiences of life, with different relationships to drug use. And all of these folks will have the capacity to create, I would say, the unified experience of acceptance that is really, really at the forefront of the Shambhala Music Festival culture. So, hope I didn't tangent too much, but the Shambassador role, I really loved learning about that, reflecting on the kind of hybrid role that they have in harm reduction. And just to make it clear, the whole harm reduction team, in terms of the crew at Shambhala, it encompasses a larger bracket of, I would say, the security, the harm reduction outreach workers who actually wander through the stages and they go and look for folks and give them education about, drug use or drinking water, or even just bringing them to the sanctuary if need be, or the folks who are working at the anchors tent that are doing the drug testing. So they actually work with an FTIR. FTIR is, if I can remember, Fourier transmission infrared something. It's a very fancy piece of lab equipment that actually shoots light into, I only know this because I worked at a drug testing site for a little bit, but it shoots light into the substance. And through that, the light that shines through actually creates a wave. So through looking at this wave on a computer, they match it to a database of similar looking waves, and basically they can match and detect certain substances based on the wave spectrum that's shown on the computer. And through that, they're able to determine, okay, this is cut with this, because I know this wave, what it looks like without the adulterant, and then they can detect the adulterant as like a spike in some part of the wave that wouldn't otherwise be there. And I'd say they have tremendous accuracy with this. They use other drug testing tools, sometimes fentanyl strips, sometimes LSD testing strips, and I'm sure they have a variety of other ways they test drugs. So great team there too. And then security, of course, like I mentioned. Medical, how could I fucking forget? Medical are the fucking warriors. They are the badasses of the harm reduction squad. Now, I'm not gonna in any way say that what I do isn't also very, very intensely important and delicate work, because working psych crisis intervention is very delicate work. But I would say the medical team has a lot to deal with. They got a lot. They like the most extreme situations, where they have to essentially detain people or essentially get them back to a physical state where they can be manageable. Like if someone's in the throes of a really, really intense psychotic episode, we got to send them to medical. And it's kind of like they know how to deal with that. They're trained to deal with that. They have the capacity to create safety in those situations where otherwise in a sanctuary, it's hard to create safety. If someone's, really getting violent, we're not able to support them. I mean, we can get security, we can get them transferred to medical, but that's not really what the sanctuary is for. The sanctuary does support people if they're having emotional breakdowns or they're in various different altered states, but we have certain protocols around medical red flags and screening for those things, and then sending folks there so they can get the attention they need. So, yeah, Sanctuary was a beautiful experience because the team was so fucking awesome. And I got to chat with folks that I would never have the opportunity to to sit with, right? Like all sorts of different various folks from all walks of life. They're just coming to this festival to decompress, to really find themselves on some level, or just to escape the tribulations of their day by day. And then something happens, right? You know, they use a little bit too much substances, or they dehydrate. That's a huge one. They don't drink enough electrolytes, or they have some sort of muscle injury or spasm as a reaction to a substance. And then they end up incapacitated. And not everybody makes it to sanctuary, unfortunately, right? Not everybody, I would say, has the good fortune of ending up at a safe space. So I just really want to emphasize this, and maybe just advocate for this, that like, take care of your friends out there, guys. You know, if you're going to music festivals, even if people have been using for a long time, just really honoring that we're all going through life and we're just taking it one day at a time, and it kind of hits us spontaneously sometimes, right? You don't know necessarily what you're in store for until you take the substance and start to feel the effects, and that could take up to an hour. And then what comes up might be manageable when you're sober or on a lower dose, but once you hit a higher dose, maybe there's some sort of intense emotional experience you just had no fucking clue was waiting for you. And typically with psychedelics, that's what happens, right? You're feeling something fully that maybe you've been putting off for a long time, or maybe you just weren't in a headspace to receive that, let's just call it a download in your body. And when your body starts to really feel it, it can feel overwhelming. It can feel like it's too much. And, you know, if it's not your first rodeo, even if it's your 10th rodeo, but if it's not your first rodeo, if it is your first rodeo, yeah, it can be really hard to stay grounded. It can really hard to stay inside what's called your window of tolerance. So a little bit of psychoed here. If you're not familiar, the window of tolerance, it's essentially your capacity to stay within your grounded self, your ability to tolerate whatever the trauma has essentially done to you. Because typically the window of tolerance relates to trauma, right? And think about it like this. You either go up outside your window of tolerance upward, and you experience what's called hyperarousal. So you start to get that fight or flight response. You start to get angry. You start to get just over the top in terms of your body. Like your heart rate will increase. Your muscles will start to spasm. You'll start to feel like you need to either fight or flee. And then if it, in some cases, you're responsible with the opposite. So you'll exit the window of tolerance through the bottom, and that's what's called hypoarousal, or sometimes referred to as dissociation. And in a dissociated state, it's like you're not even really aware what's in front of you. Sometimes your vision starts to kind of get a little bit blurry or disconnected, or you know, you're inattentive, you forget things, it's hard to focus. Or full-on disassociation can just literally put you to sleep, and you're completely unconscious, and you're no longer able to function. So these are just the different ways that your body's responding to some experience of reliving trauma. And this can very much, you can get outside your window of tolerance very quickly when you're using certain substances. And that's just something that I would say in harm reduction, they're very aware of, because it's just, it's an unfamiliar environment, right? It's an unfamiliar environment. And, you know, certain drugs are maybe an experiment, like you're trying it for the first time, and you're just doing your best to kind of manage that. And even on your best day, it could just be a lot. So I don't know. I've not taken every substance under the moon, right? I've taken quite a few different types of substances, you know, mainly psychedelics, but other times I was taking MDMA or ketamine or things like this while I was in my rave days when I was about 17, 18, 19. But I gradually stopped using these substances. I would say I could say that taking psychedelics like mushrooms, and especially in intentional settings, was really what helped me bring awareness to the fact that I was using these other substances and not necessarily in love with, let's just say, the after effects. So I kind of want to shift gears and focus a little bit more on my actual experience at the festival. and maybe just like highlighting how beautiful it can be to go sober. Now, I don't expect most people to go sober. It's really not a necessary experience unless you're really fully prepared for that and really fully signing up for that. But yeah, you get to notice all the little cool things that people do when they're feeling safe. Like when they're feeling connected to the community, when they're feeling, let's just say, open to be their authentic self, right? Like there's so much beautiful creative energy, and there's so much emphasis on community. And in a festival like Shambhala, I would say acceptance and self-acceptance is really at the forefront of what the festival is trying to promote, right? So you see any random person you're walking by, you give them a little smile or a head nod or a hello. Sometimes you'll catch somebody on the odd, feeling low, and maybe they won't respond. But for the most part, you'll get a very enthusiastic, how the hell you doing? Happy Shambhala kind of thing. It's kind of like it brings out the best in people, even when they don't really feel like connecting with people otherwise. Like maybe they're socially anxious, or maybe that's just not what you do in your regular life. But when you're at this festival, it kind of brings out this inner desire to just kind of see everybody as a potential friend and everybody as a potential sometimes partner. But here's the thing, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that just because we all have the best intentions at a music festival that it's always like heaven. There's a lot of challenging, difficult experiences people are processing, and being at the sanctuary, you kind of see more of that, right? And not to say that there's anything wrong with folks struggling and having problems and genuinely just like going through some shit, because that is life. That is life for you. We're all gonna, on some level, just do our best to manage the difficulties, the challenges, the struggles, the adversities, the consequences of experiencing trauma. I don't want to use the word consequences, but the reactions, right? The responses that we have of something that happened to us that created an experience of trauma in our body. And, we're all just doing our best, I would say. And I just feel like there's a very necessary topic when it comes to harm reduction is consent. Consenting for just the little things, even, right? Like even like a hug. That's something I try to promote a lot, and they do in the safe space really well, is just like asking somebody if they want a hug, right? And consent is one of those things where it's like, sometimes in many cases it can be subjective, right? In terms of like what is appropriate for one person doesn't feel appropriate or safe to another. So just like really having the capacity to check in with yourself, like, is this something that feels good objectively, right? Is this something that people can appreciate and feel good about objectively, or is this something that I just genuinely really enjoy and feel good about? And especially when you're in the throes of drugs, depending on the substance, of course, it can be either easier to pick up these things, you're more sensitive to boundaries being crossed, or you're maybe less sensitive or more, you have kind of a tunnel vision for the festival experience or the experience of pleasure. And this is where there can be boundaries crossed. And yeah, that's definitely not something that I love to hear about, but I do try to create a lot more acceptance and understanding in these spaces, or at least an awareness around that. Okay, people are using substances, and so people have a variety of different experiences around consent and physical touch and what's appropriate to them. And I will say that there's some people that are just abusive in terms of they maybe have an inclination to want to cross those boundaries. And I'm not really trying to speak to that directly, but I just really want to bring awareness to that. There's a nuance when you look to the festival atmosphere and you look to the difficulty of obtaining, I'd say, consent in some cases. So we try to have more of an openness in terms of understanding like where those nuances are, those ethical gray areas. But typically speaking, some of these like there's hard lines. There's hard lines where people essentially these are boundaries. These are boundaries where people ought not to cross. And I'm trying not really, I really don't want to sit here and judge people, but sexual assault happens at these festivals, and unwanted touch very frequently, I would say quite frequently, happens as well. And I can't say it's at a pandemic level or this isn't an epidemic, but this is certainly something that we're taught about and we're trained how to handle for a good reason. So in the sanctuary, we do have, most of us have training, or we're provided training through the festival to understand how to approach these situations and create safety for individuals who have essentially been victimized or are survivors of sexual assault. And it's a very sensitive and time sensitive topic. So, we do our best to just allow those who need to express themselves and be witnessed to be witnessed, and know that consent around even physical touch is integral. It's very, very important. And just doing our best to repair that trust, which ultimately has been broken. So just really acknowledging that someone's trust has been broken, their boundaries have been violated, and we're not always, but often the first point of entry for that. So I will thankfully report that through the duration of my shifts, I didn't experience somebody who had undergone something like this. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. And I would say the one of the problems is so many of these go underreported because, like, as you can imagine, being in that position, you might hold on to a lot of shame, right? Or even blaming yourself sometimes for using substances or putting yourself in a certain position. But it ultimately doesn't matter. Even if you were on substances, you didn't have the capacity to consent. And just allowing people to feel witnessed, regardless of what went down, just allowing them to feel witnessed in their experience and validating their experience and holding them with a degree of non-judgment and safety and acceptance. So I just want to sort of speak to that a little bit, as we do have to look out for each other. It is important that we're all on some level educated about the risks of, let's just say, taking certain substances that alter our state of consciousness and put us in vulnerable states. And at the same time, having people around that you trust, having folks around you that understand what to do when you're in a vulnerable state, or, let's just say the parameters of how your consciousness gets altered as a result of taking too much of a substance and what you can do then. And just creating that safety within yourself first and foremost, right? Like set and setting, understanding where you're at mentally, how much of your drugs you're able to handle, getting it tested, ideally starting slow, really knowing how to progressively move into a dose, and that it's a marathon, not a sprint. And then at the end of the day, part of your setting, your environment, is having folks around you that are safe, that are maybe just on some level aware of harm reduction and know how to create that safety for you. And maybe you got a contact, like it could be a partner, or it could just be a close friend, someone that you could call and talk with if you absolutely need to, if you're feeling like you're in some unsafe space. And then ultimately knowing where the resources, knowing where the harm reduction spaces are, knowing just what your options are in terms of creating that safety. And, being a counselor, I also recognize that not all these situations are preventable. And there are people that are predators, right? There are people that are actively abusing other people, and they're like in some capacity they're searching for people that meet that criteria. So just like to have the awareness that, okay, and not to introduce paranoia, but just like know that you should do your due diligence. And especially as women, if you are a woman, it's really important that you're creating your safety net and you have your protocol, and you're able to trust men ultimately, but just understand where those red flags come up, and like trusting your intuition, trusting your body, trusting when something feels off, then go with that feeling, and search for maybe like a person that could be a witness. And that's another really beautiful part about the festival culture, is bystander intervention, recognizing that yes, there are harm reduction that wander through and try to support people in that way, but there are folks out there that really genuinely do care about other people and really do pick up on these things and notice and can be a witness, and sometimes can just be that moment of safety that you need to be pulled out of an uncomfortable situation, whatever that looks like for you, or whatever that is for you. So yeah, recognizing that there are folks out there that care, and ideally we all understand how bystander intervention works. And I mean, I guess I could give you a quick rundown. It's kind of like, just if you see somebody in a situation, ask or approach, and just get curious, maybe even be a little bit, not necessarily nosy, but just bringing some degree of attention to the fact that there's something there. And if you feel like it's necessary, maybe even just like, hey, such and such is looking for you. I just wanted to kind of like see how you're doing. And there's a lot of ways to which you can just create safety in that moment, as kind of like in the form of a check-in, not necessarily like placing yourself in between a person who's an aggressor or abuser, or put yourself into harm's way necessarily. You want to really try to avoid doing that. And I'm sure that's kind of clear as to why, but yeah, you're not trying to be a hero, but there are ways that you can support people in these situations that are subtle, and just recognizing that that's something that we all have the capacity to do, right? So just there's a really great breakdown of bystander intervention. It's on Safe Night Out Vancouver. So if you look up Safe Night Out Vancouver, they have beautiful resources that teach more about that process. They even have trainings available. So if you feel like you're like, oh well, I don't know if I understand how to do this kind of thing in my festival scene or my club scene, it's like there are trainings. Often they're free harm reduction trainings where you can learn just about some of the basics of consent and bystander intervention. But at the end of the day, as I was saying, these kind of things happen. Unfortunately, you can't always save people at the point of contact, and that's where I personally really admire those who are able to hold space and not judgmentally be a witness, or on some level just be an ear for someone who needs to talk about these things. And it could be a professional, right? It could be a professional counselor, but it could just be a friend. And just recognizing that like sometimes what people need is just to be heard, just really be witnessed in their story, witnessed in their experience as it's been experienced for them, and not trying to make judgments or assessments. And I know these things can get complicated. There's a lot of drama. There's a lot of he said, she said, and that further complicates the experience of the trauma of the abuse, right? The experience of the abuse. And this is where I would say the topic of complex trauma comes into play. So if you're not aware of what complex trauma is when something happened to you at one point in time, right? The initial critical incident. It's called critical incident trauma. Something happened, it was noticeable, it was clear. The way your body responded to it was very clear. And over time, something distorting or changing or accumulating onto that experience makes it more confusing for your mind, of course, but it makes it more confusing for your nervous system as well, to really understand the experience of the trauma as it's unfolded and as it continues to unfold. So when it's a continual experience, say an abusive relationship, that's a form of complex trauma, or it can become a form of complex trauma over time. And these experiences of what was initially like a sexual assault or a physical assault or something else in that category, that was the initial trauma. But then the invalidation, the confusion and the complexities and the interpretations from the whole, let's just say, friend space or surrounding community, that creates complex trauma, and that creates confusion within the person's interpretation of whether or not they feel like they should even really, I guess, like it creates shame versus an experience of something happened to me and I am trying to move through that initial experience and then trying to process the emotions around it. It kind of distills or dilutes the emotional experience to the point where you're not really sure what emotions are what. Again, the invalidation of it creates a lot of inner turmoil, internal conflict, and it gets internalized. Ultimately, the shame becomes internalized. So I hope that was a helpful breakdown. Emotional abuse is complex. Complex trauma is obviously complex. And what ultimately happens is when a person isn't able to fully feel what it was they went through, it gets internalized. And no, it's no longer about what happened to them or, you know, the circumstance outside themselves. It's just they are inherently bad. That's what gets internalized. That's the belief that starts to form is, I am a bad person deep down. I deserved this thing because I'm unworthy of love, or there's like a core belief underneath that gets perpetuated. Sometimes it can be from childhood. Sometimes it can be from a past relationship. But this is how I would say consent culture and festival culture, and then add psychedelics to the mix. And then all these different relationship dynamics and all these different community dynamics surrounding it can really create a very complex experience of trauma for somebody who ultimately might even know what happened to them originally and might even have the ability to come to terms with and accept what happened to them originally. But then when they go and try to heal that trauma, when they try and go and sit with that and fully process it, and there's all these surrounding events and different interpretations, and you know the confusion starts to build up, that's where it can become very tricky. That's where it can become like you're not just healing one thing, you're healing all the fragments of the 10, 20, 30, up to 100 or so different things that happened in between that point and when you are seeking support. So, I mean, you know, I guess I got a little bit off topic here, but not necessarily. Just recognizing that there's a lot that goes on under the surface, and you know, this is the nature of life as well, right? If you look to life, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. It's not all just about the highs and the joy and the fun and the pleasure and the things that, you know, the connection, the love, the experience of spiritual highs. Like, these are fucking phenomenal experiences of a life. I'm not, deep down, I'm not a nihilist. I just recognize that, yeah, Shambhala does on some level give us a good representation of the dualistic nature of life and trauma and mental health and emotional experiences and relationship dynamics, but it condenses a lot of these things, right? And it kind of palettes them in a way in a very short period of time, sometimes 1 week, sometimes 2 weeks, you know, depending on how long you stick around. And it can be a fucking roller coaster, right? I just want to really acknowledge and validate music festivals are a fucking roller coaster. And, you know, oftentimes you're presented with the good, the bad. Sometimes it's just a fucking hard time. And I just recommend folks that are new to these festivals, maybe don't just start with one big giant ass marathon of a festival, no matter how much your buddies or your girlfriends want you to be there, you know, because they probably do. But just kind of knowing like what you're getting into and really understanding kind of like what is your relationship to being in a really big overstimulating environment, and maybe in a sort of like there's a collective witnessing of your trauma in a sense, right? Like if you're experiencing something challenging, it might be in a space where there's a lot of people around, and what that feels like for you, or what that could be like for you, or what that might trigger. So just having the recognition that yeah, like going from 1 to 100 is really not necessary. And I can speak from my own experience. I built up to Shambhala. I went to raves, forest raves, all sorts of different things. Did a lot of my own inner work with psychedelics prior to going to Shambhala and taking psychedelics. And I guess I speak from a harm reduction perspective here, just saying like, yo, you don't have to go to Shambhala and take a buttload of psychedelics, smoke DMT right away. Like there's no rush. There's no one telling you that that's the formula for living a good life or getting peak experiences or becoming a very complex, sophisticated, psychedelic influenced individual, right? Like, hell, I can say from my experience, psychedelics and festivals and all these things, they've really developed me as an artist, as a person, as a philosopher, as a human being in general. I feel like I've gained tremendous value from having these life experiences, because that's kind of what it's about at the end of the day, don't you think? It's about these life experiences. It's about living a full life and going to the sort of the thresholds of what our limits are, and kind of facing our fears. And there's a tapestry of rich experiences available to us, and that's why we go to, I'd say it's one of the reasons we go to music festivals, is so we can experience more of life. But just recognize it's not a race, it's not a contest. No one's telling you that if you don't smoke DMT that you're missing out on something big. Or I mean, some people might, but I just want to tell you that if you don't feel called to it, that's cool. It's not everybody's drug of choice. It's not necessary to, say, connect to spirituality, to connect to God, to connect to higher consciousness. It's not always necessary. And music festivals as a whole, whereas I say they're a worthwhile experience, but really just build your way up, know what you're getting into. Maybe sometimes it's good to have your crew. You might want to do the solo thing once in a while when you're ready, if you're feeling prepared for it. But buckle in, be open. Go to the stages you want to go to. Don't always get roped into seeing the artists that all your buddies want to see or whatever. It's like, go to the stages you want to go to. Go with that flow. And know that there's support. There is absolutely support in all different forms, in all different expressions of support. So whether that be having a sober space, there's a sober space at Shambhala. There's the Camp Clean Beats. There's meetings there. If you really feel called, you can go and sit in a meeting, and there's 3 of them a day, and they're honestly, they sound like they're fucking tremendous. I wanted to attend them so badly. That's one of my goals. That's one of my bucket lists, is I want to attend these things. I want to learn what they're about. But I just learned all about how accessible they are, and anyone who I've met who's been at Camp Clean Beats absolutely loves it. And it's available for a reason. There are folks there that do want to prioritize their sobriety, and that's totally fucking cool. I don't go there and preach. I don't go there and be like, oh, I'm just like sober because blah, 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 blah. No, it's not my role. I'm not there to do that. I'm there to be just another person who's really just trying to figure shit out. So, it's the one takeaway from this podcast is, you go to music festivals, you're probably going to figure some shit out, and make sure that you do it in a safe way, and you're able to recover and bounce back from whatever the hell you figure out. So thanks for listening to my ramble and my rant. Sanctuary was an amazing experience. I would do it again. I'm probably going to do Base Coast next year as a harm reduction team as well. Just meeting so many beautiful humans on the harm reduction team, and obviously just on the farm, as well as, every little aspect of the experience felt like it was fulfilling for me. I did get sick. That sucked, I will admit. You're going into an ocean of 20,000 people. Your immune system is bound to, at least for me, it's bound to burst and get you a little sick, and that's okay. I don't take, that's not my primary takeaway, is I went to Shambhala and I got sick. But I went to Shambhala. I did the sanctuary shifts. I felt really fucking good about the people I supported, the way I supported them, the team we have there, the interactions I had with guests, the interactions I had with folks outside of my harm reduction position. The nature there is immaculate, And last thing is respect the land, right? Respect yourself, respect each other, but also respect the land. Pick up your garbage, right? Maybe if you feel inclined, pray to the land. Offer tobacco, offer whatever plant you feel is a good offering, and really just acknowledging that this land is indigenous land, and these are sacred mountains, these are sacred rivers, this farm is a beautiful sacred place. And just honoring that, acknowledging that. I feel like whether you're into the spiritual thing or not, it really does come down to gratitude and appreciation and respect for the folks that were there before us, the folks that still are a part of that land and connect with that land and actively pray to that land. So I just want to end on that caveat is these are traditional lands, and Shambhala may be about many things to many people, but for me, it was about attuning to the land, connecting with the beautiful humans that are on the farm, and being of service. So hope you guys have a great rest of your night. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll talk to you soon. Peace.